What's up, everybody? Thanks again for joining me for another edition of March 4th with Mike Bauman. I, of course, am your host, Mike Bauman. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. If you're a returning listener, I greatly appreciate your continued love and support. And if you're a brand new listener of the show, man, thank you so much for hopping aboard that pirate ship. You can follow me on Instagram at March 4th Pod, on YouTube at March 4th Pod. My website is march4th.podbean.com. The link tree with all of my stuff is in the podcast description for this episode. Y'all made it here, so you found me somehow, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to check out another edition of the March 4th with Mike Bauman podcast. I'm going to be real with you guys, man. It's been, and I'm not saying this looking for sympathy, but it's been a productive year. But the most recent couple of months have been emotionally challenging, just with like family stuff going on. As of recording this today, I think that my grandmother, my mom's mom, my grandma Bauman passed away almost 2 years ago now. But I think my grandma Bauman, or my grandma Ratty rather, is my mom's mom, isn't long for this world as of recording the intro and close to this week's episode. She's had a great run, 94 years old. She'll be 95 if she makes it to October 24th, which right now I don't think that's realistic. And like I said, death is part of life. As of this morning, my stepmom's father passed away. So there's just been some emotional stuff as far as that goes with like family, and more so me kind of worrying about family and them dealing with all of the things that surround that when people get older and they go into decline. It's tough. It's tough. It's not like the movies, at least in my life, and the death that I've been privy to in sort of my circle, my periphery these past couple of years. There's been, and I've said it probably ad nauseum for people who listen to the podcast all the time, but there's been more people around me who have passed in the past couple of years than at any other point in my life. And so death is part of life, right? But it's not like the movies. It's not like TV. You hope that people die peacefully in their sleep, but that thing of like they shut their eyes, and it's just like this beautiful moment. I mean, from what I've seen, unfortunately, man, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but it hasn't been pretty for people that I love. It wasn't pretty for my grandfather, who I was really close to. My mom's dad, my dad's dad, passed away when he was 18 years old, not long after he got out of high school. So I never met my grandpa Bauman. But so yeah, man, I'm not in a bad mood. I'm not even really necessarily in like a quote unquote super somber mood. My grandma and I got a chance to talk recently. I called her at the facility that she was in, and she, at least at that time, was still, there enough mentally that we had a good conversation. But physically, she's deteriorating really bad. She's had a lot of pain. And it's just tough, man. I won't go into all the deets, but it's just been kind of an emotional thing, and, worrying about my mom, and dealing with a lot of stuff. And so yeah, man. So I'm not in a bad mood or necessarily a super somber mood when it comes to this, but I guess I'm just kind of even more introspective and reflective than I normally am with my sensitive Pisces self. But yeah, I say all that to say, just spend as much time as you can, you guys, with the people you love, and appreciate those moments, especially the older people in your life, right? There's a lot of wisdom that you can learn from grandparents, especially I've found in my life, where just based on their life experience, the amount of time that they have on this planet, there's so much they can impart onto you about how to carry yourself or how to deal with the trials and tribulations of life. And, if this is indeed my grandma's last day on planet Earth, from a soul vibe, I hope she knows how much I love her and how much I appreciated everything that her and my grandfather did for us growing up. When my grandpa retired, they initially moved down to Florida here in the States. And for those of you international listeners, thank you, welcome. But in the States, there's a lot of elderly people who retire in the state of Florida because there's beaches and the weather's warmer. So especially for Midwesterners like me and my relatives that preceded me in life, a lot of them end up going to Florida because it's nice weather, the beaches, the sea breeze, all that stuff, especially when you come from snow and cold and gray. The last winter I was home in Toledo, Ohio, my hometown, we had snow in April. You know what I mean? And for perspective, down here in Tennessee, where I live now, that would blow people's minds if it snowed in April. Usually by April, we're already into like the 70s and sometimes the 80s here. I digress. So, but anyway, my grandma and my grandpa, my mom's parents, they moved down to Florida after he retired from Sherwin-Williams. But then once, their kids, my mom and my aunt and my uncle, once they all started having kids, it wasn't enough for them to just to come home in the summers and see everybody because they had a condo off of Lake Erie in Ohio, and I have vague memories of that in Port Clinton. It's weird how you have certain memories that stick out, that are very vivid, and I have a very vivid memory of being in the kitchen at their condo in Port Clinton with my brother and my grandma making eggs for breakfast, and my grandpa waking up and having his decaf and stuff. I can almost still smell. I know it might sound crazy, but I can almost kind of still smell that morning. And I was probably a little guy. I was probably 3, maybe even 2. And people might think I'm full of crap, but I still remember that. I still remember looking at the little pond behind their condo where they lived in Florida before they moved back here full time in the early 90s. They're not in Tennessee. When I say here, I guess I'm just in the perspective of being home right now, because I know I will be soon when that time eventually comes. But they came back to Ohio to be there and watch their grandkids grow up. There's 10 of us, so they, and no grandkid was more important than the other. It didn't matter if we played sports, if we didn't. My grandma and grandpa are big football fans, and my grandpa's brother was a really good football player, so he was a big football guy. My grandpa loved football, and he loved sports in general, loved basketball, and so they went to all of our games growing up, in the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization, but even when we had plays, or I remember I had a spelling bee when I was 12, and I got nervous and I spelled calculated wrong. They were there for that. So I'm really grateful. And I hope that my grandma can just, as cheesy as this may sound, I hope she can feel my energy, that I love her, and I hope she has a peaceful transition, and so if you have grandparents in your life, if you have elderly people that were there for you growing up, try your best to be there for them at the end. And if you're not in the same state, like in my case, I haven't been in the last 8 years, and by the time I moved to Tennessee, my grandpa had been dead for 4 years at that point. So it's been tough on my grandma and my mom and my aunt, my uncle. There's a lot of stuff there I'm not going to get into on this in a public setting with my show, other than to say that stick together as a family, look out for each other, love each other, communicate, and be there for the elderly people in your life, man. Especially if they were there for you when you were young. And it's part of getting older. I'm 35 now. People die, man. It sounds morbid to say, but it's sad but true. And so be good to each other, be kind to each other, support each other. And speaking of being kind to each other and supporting each other, man, this week's guest, I'm so excited to get on the podcast. He is a guy who actually is a listener of the program, and I believe he discovered me when I had Stoneside on last year. Shout out to Crane and all the dudes in Stoneside. They're making great music if you love heavy music, and great storytelling. They're awesome at that. I digress. But I think he checked out that episode and then listened to me, continue to listen to the show and go back in the archives after that. And he sent me a lot of kind words over the past year, on Instagram and the DMs and stuff. And that always warms my heart when people take the time, when they enjoy what you're doing, to reach out to you and let you know, And he's a musician in his own right and is very talented and has put out some cool stuff. And when it came time for some new releases, he reached out to me, and I wanted to make time to get him on the show, not only because he had kind words for me, but because as somebody who's also building an audience and doing things independently, I'm never going to be somebody who shuns away anybody from the show. And I'm always hard on myself about getting back to people in a timely manner, because I haven't been the greatest about getting back to emails and stuff in a timely manner. But I had some openings, and I was so happy to get him on. He is none other than Ben Fassett, and the music that he puts out is under the name Torr, Torr, on Instagram. You can find him at Torr Band, Torr Band, all together. No hyphens or any of that. But in April, he released his EP called Lone Desert Bones. It just came out on April 10th, 2023. And then just a week ago, as of the release of this episode, he released his follow-up EP called Snakeskin Face, which just dropped on August 22nd. I really enjoyed it, man. And if you're a fan of heavy music, if you're a fan of heavy vocals, if you're a fan of good storytelling, if you're a fan of progressive moments and good, instrumental moments, there's a lot of that in what Ben does. And especially if you like kind of like doom metal, if you like kind of like the sludgy ambient type stuff, it's all in his work. And in this podcast, you learn about his musical journey in terms of how he got into heavier music, the themes in his work. You learn about the heartfelt places his lyrics come from, the meaning behind what he's putting out. And we go to some tough places, as we do on the show, as far as anxiety and depression and heartbreak and death. I mean, we talk about all those things. But as you guys know, or if you're first-time listeners, it's all done just of letting people know that we all struggle. We all go through difficult times. And we just had a great conversation, man. We're pretty close to the same age. We love a lot of the same music. And we took the positive vibes from social media and brought them on an episode to you with the release of Snakeskin Face. So without further ado, I'm going to shut my big yapper and give you guys my conversation with Ben Fassett of Torr. Here it is. Alrighty, well, there we go. Well, Ben, thanks again so much, dude, for taking the time to do this. I'm really excited, given the forthcoming EP that's coming out, Snakeskin Face, right, is what it's going to be called, and
Yes,
getting a chance. Lone Desert Bones, which came out, was that April, I believe that one came out, and then even before that, you had some singles going back to 2022, man. So I'm excited to get into it with you and, put the people onto your music, man. So thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate the hell out of it. I'm psyched and I'm dancing.
Well, I guess just for a little bit of background for people listening, you've been kind enough, like over like the past year or so, you've sent me some kind messages about the show, and I'm never somebody who fishes for compliments, and like we were talking even before we officially hit record, like I kind of am self-deprecating to a fault, and it kind of sounds like we share that a little bit. But I had Stone Side on, shout out to Crane and everything they're doing, and I think you guys know each other, right? Was that how you found the show? Was that
Yeah, Crane has been super kind and super patient with my fanboyism, and I always make it a point to reach out to people who I think are doing good work, whether it be in a journalistic sense, musically, anything that I find inspirational, even if they never see it. I always want to make it a point to reach out, and in case they need it, to be like, hey, what you're doing right there is super cool. It's just kind of like a sticking point for me. And once I heard the podcast with Crane, that absolutely launched me down the rabbit hole. And also, just as an ex-journalism student, seeing well curated interviews is always kind of it tickles a really comforting spot for me.
Well, thank you, dude. Like I said, that means a lot, because that's what I went to school for, and I kind of put this stuff down for a while, as you know, listening to the show. And so it's been fun over the last couple of years to get back into it and connect with a lot of really cool people like yourself. So whenever anybody takes the time to check out the show, it always does mean a lot. But for you musically, man, just digging into your background, for people who aren't aware, I was reading, shout out to Jesse from the Antelope Valley Press. You were featured just about a year ago. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be like late August, early September when this hits everybody's ears as they're listening. But you were featured in August of that, and it was kind of talking about your musical journey and how you came from a family of musicians. Is that correct? Like you kind of grew up around music, or people
Uh,
in the family?
Not quite musicians. My dad always had, every household has the old acoustic in the corner, and he would always be finger picking, playing Bob Dylan songs, singing terribly, but kind of like comfortingly. But there was always a lot of musical appreciation. My mom is the one who was always playing oldies, and she got me into, James Brown, Creedence Clearwater Revival, The Doors. And my dad was, pardon me, kind of a connoisseur of like a lot of classic rock, like The Police, ZZ Top, Carlos Santana. And he also introduced me to a lot of jazz through Thelonious Monk and Charles Mingus, and a lot of blues with Taj Mahal and Buddy Guy and Son House. So there was always a lot of music happening in the background. So yeah, there was always something playing, and it was either the local Antelope Valley oldie station, K Earth 101 actually, or like classic rock happening or something.
So yeah, so you're in California. You're based out there for people who aren't aware, but we're not going to give them your exact address because there's weirdos.
I
But
live at.
is that where you grew up?
Yeah, I'm a desert rat, kind of born and raised in the Antelope Valley. And much like every young kid in like a small or sparse area, always wanted to escape, got the opportunity to do so, lived in like some really dense cities, hated every moment of it, came back as soon as I could, basically.
Yeah, because we're about the same age, right? Are you like 36, 37?
Yeah. I'm 37, so we're right around the same.
Yeah, I'm 35 now. So yeah, just checking out the story. So for people who aren't aware, where is the Antelope Valley in California?
Yeah, so the Lancaster, Palmdale, Little Rock area, we call them the cities that meth built. They're kind of like an hour north of Los Angeles and pretty much smack dab in the Mojave Desert, and just kind of nothing but miles and miles.
Yeah, my one of my best friends, shout out Nate, who was a U.S. Marine and served when we were fighting overseas in Iraq, which is crazy to think about. A 19-year-old with a machine gun, just the sacrifice our armed forces make for us. I digress, but he worked for a company for a while. We both moved out of our hometown of Toledo in 2015. He left in like April or May, and then I left in October. And he for a little bit lived out in Apple Valley. And I've never been there, but I know he wasn't a big fan of kind of, he and I are similar, that I think we don't like large groups of people, but yeah, I don't think and he worked a lot overseas in that job, but he wasn't a real big fan of living out there. So if there's anybody from Apple Valley that listens to this, I'm not hating on your city. I don't know anything about it, but just relating to Ben here, yeah, my best friends that was out there didn't enjoy it too much.
But also for anyone in Apple Valley who's like grimacing at that, you know what you did. I've never been there either, so I don't know.
But yeah, so you mentioned the musical influences from your parents. So I always like to ask people, and again, as somebody listening who listens to the show, I know I kind of go to these places. When did heavy music bite you then? Was it a song, a record, a friend?
Yeah, so we kind of share that source a little bit as well, in that I had an older brother who was, listening to a lot of 80s thrash at the time, the Metallica, Megadeth, Suicidal Tendencies of the time, and those ones, and I know it's a little bit of a sacrilege, but there was something there, but it didn't really like hit the nerve as much. And then, Pantera, old Sepultura back when they were just a weird death metal band. Death, those were the things that kind of perked the ear up a little bit. And then again, because we have a similar basis, I kind of came up, my consciousness kind of clicked on during the MTV Headbangers Ball of it all. So there was a lot of, Seven Dust, Chevelle, Mudvayne, Deftones, Incubus, all those things kind of hit at the same time, right at the moment when I started getting genuinely hungry. And then that kind of, that led to the explosion into all the different subgenres. That having been said, I think the two most important for me is Josh Homme with his working Caius, Queens of the Stone Age, Them Crooked Vultures, and Ben Sharp, who fronted Cloud Kicker. Especially him, because his career was so very unusual. You would never see him. He only toured once with Intronaut. You never knew when he was releasing something. You just have to look, and it's just, oh, Subsume dropped. Okay. And he always did a name your own price back in the Bandcamp days of yore. And besides like just the randomity of it all, very quickly became my favorite composer to this day of all time.
That's cool, man. I'll have to check out. I don't think I'm familiar, but I'll have to check out that work. But like Headbangers Ball, it's funny you say that, because the initial Headbangers Ball was like early '90s Ricky Rackman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they brought it back, and then wasn't it Jamie Josta from Hatebreed who was hosting it? I think maybe when they brought it back later on.
Yeah.
But so I kind of have vague memories of the early '90s, because I was born in '88. So I remember like MTV at that time, like we had to be careful because, being a little guy, like I was 5 in 1993. But, like my exposure to early MTV was like probably like a lot of people out there was Pauly Shore. So I remember like In the Army Now, like my brother and I still talk about that movie to this day. But those shows, like, I think it was foundational for a lot of people, because you had like Totally Pauly, but then you had MTV Spring Break, and artists would play on that. And that I remember in the late '90s. So like at the height of nu metal, I remember, I think it was Limp Bizkit did one of them one year, I remember. And then but like the early '90s, you had like Yo MTV Raps, you had Headbangers Ball. There's still clips on YouTube. There was one where like Ricky Rackman went to a water park with Alice in Chains. So yeah, I think that was it was foundational for a lot of people. But all those bands that you mentioned, shout out Seven Dust, their new record Truth Killer came out, and pun intended, it's love it. But one of my awesome favorite bands. But yeah, we've got similar tastes there with like Mudvayne, Seven Dust. All of those bands really started to kind of come on, because MTV, if you remember too, in the late '90s, they would have like blocks of music. So there'd be like the hip hop music video block, then there'd be the rock and metal music video block, and the Infiltration, when Korn, became the biggest band on the planet, arguably, and is still as big as they've ever been, really, which is awesome. When they started to infiltrate TRL, that's when I really started to kind of even go more even heavy.
Yeah, and it was almost, particularly at that point, it became a lot more democratic in the way that it actually shared its time, both with the music, and also like it was kind of a precursor to what Cartoon Network would eventually do with Adult Swim with the animated stuff. And animated stuff, that I pronounced that weird, but like it was a weird chaos that was very structured and kind of lent to a kind of creative format that I don't think you see too often anymore, especially because broadcast TV, not quite the way it was back in the day.
Yeah, because back then the only really like reality TV that you had, at least on MTV, was like Road Rules and The Real World. And then they started to do the spin-offs. And then by the time you got to, I think, like late like the early, like the late, like 2010. I think people call it like the aughts now, but that's when they started to get into, I think, like Teen Mom and all that stuff. And and again, like you said, I reality TV is like cheaper to produce than like sitcoms and stuff like that. And then it became wildly popular with shows like Survivor and all that stuff. But yeah, I really miss the music video days, although it does seem like they're coming back now. Like bands are starting to do cool conceptual music videos. I've had a few artists on the podcast that have done some really cool stuff. Um and it's cool to see that coming back, because there was a minute there, like probably about a decade ago into like the mid 2010s, where the thing was doing the lyric video when a single would come out, and it'd be like
Yeah.
a graphic lyric video. That was like sort of the thing. And those, I feel like, have started, at least from what I've seen from bands, have started to kind of go away. And now it's kind of back to music videos again, which is cool.
And you can kind of see where the budget line resides in a lot of projects when you see like the visualizer, and you go, okay, you're not quite, the budget isn't quite there for a full production for a video. Good on you. At least you're putting some colorful on, and
Yeah.
hence why you haven't seen anything among those lines with me.
Well, I think what's cool though is and you as a musician can give me your feedback on this too. And I've talked about this with other people, but there's so much more out there now. But also, I think the barrier to entry isn't kind of what it used to be, in
Hmm.
terms of raising money to go into a studio. Now, if you take the time to learn it, there's a lot of cool plugins and DAWs and stuff that you can use and kind of record right in your room, and it sounds awesome. And I'm sure there's probably people from the analog days where it's like, brother, nothing sounds like recording tape, which I'm sure that maybe there's some truth to that too. But because I think even over the years, like Dave Grohl and stuff, they've recorded, I think a couple albums, they've done it kind of the old school way with the tape
Yeah.
and stuff, kind of that organic feel. And you're not so worried about playing it perfect, and the imperfections are still in there. I digress. But for you, as somebody who's been, you know, sitting on a catalog of songs, which we'll get into just from reading that article in the Antelope Valley Press. Like, do you feel like, as an independent creator, that's something that you like? Is that, hey, with the budget that I have, I can make some stuff that still sounds pretty awesome.
Oh, the studio is magic to me. The fact that I actually have a room dedicated to this just tickles me to the ends of the earth. And I mean, yeah, it's not the most ideal setup. It's very DIY, but I've got instruments that inspire me because I've been able to build up over time. I've learned enough production to make it not terrible, out of necessity, because of the whole tremor thing. I don't want to book time and then waste it, potentially, or waste like a producer's time or anything like that. So everything that I have gathered here has been built both out of necessity and just the fact that I can wake up in the morning and go into the next room and just sit down and go. As far as the quality, I mean, it's always subjective, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it sounds great. Like in terms of professionally produced and bands that I listen to, who are on labels or whatever. Like I think that's what's cool again about today, is you can do some really cool stuff on your own. And speaking of which, you mentioned the Tremors thing. For people who aren't aware, like that was around what, like 12, 13 years old. You notice that it was kind of like a family type of thing. Like, can you
Yeah, it runs in the family. My uncle's got it. My dad had it. Several people. And the Cliff Notes version, it's called an essential tremor, and it's nothing terribly combative, but it just kind of means hands don't work good every now and again. And it's a little preventative every now and again when I'm, playing guitar or anything. But it just it mostly means that because I'm such a stickler for not wanting to waste anyone's time, everything about me doing all of this myself is out of necessity and also respect for other people's time. So, I started learning how to mix because I didn't want to book studio time. I started doing vocals because I didn't want to waste a vocalist's time. This was all going to be an instrumental project at first. And no, I realized the big gaps and said, okay, no, I got to do vocals. Guess it's up to me. So it's it's a barrier without being a barrier to a certain extent, especially touching on the theme of perseverance, of endurance. Like, and in fact, the entire reason why I picked up guitar in earnest was because I was told you can't play guitar, your hands are too shaky, and it's like, oh fuck you, I'm gonna do it then. So, and immediately leapt to 7 and 8 strings because the thickness of the strings helped with my hands significantly comparatively to like your standard 6 string. So just learning to adapt in accordance.
Yeah, so 12, 13 was when you discovered this or when it started to become an issue. And then so was it not until like mid-20s that you picked up the guitar the first time?
Yeah, I was real late to the party, as it were, because again, that old dusty acoustic was always there. I was I formed my knowledge of basic chords, just kind of dicked around with it for a little bit, but never took it serious. And yeah, then the gauntlet was thrown at, I want to say 23, 24. And immediately, like, no, with a fervor you don't understand, I'm going to prove you wrong.
So what was it then about that point in time? Was it just something that clicked where you're like, screw it, I'm going to do it? Or was it you went to see a doctor again and it resurfaced again and it was like somebody told you you can't do it that made you do it? Like, what was it about, I guess, the gap between like 12, 13 and then like early mid-20s when you picked it up again?
So I think I only went to the doctor a couple times for it, just like once where it's like, you're a little shaky. What's going on there, bro? And then once more to kind of confirm. But it had always, a desire to do so had always been there. It was just a friend in jest said, no, you can't do that. And that was, no, hell no. It's really quite that simple in the end.
Are you guys still friends now?
Yeah, absolutely. 6'2" beast of a man from Florida.
Has he given you any feedback on your new stuff? Or is he like, well, I was wrong?
I mean, he's a pretty good guitarist in his own right. So, and blows me out of the water with my ones and zeros. But he's given me some positive feedback on the compositions as a whole.
That's good. That's good. It's always good when people kind of come around. And yeah, I had a friend, an old friend. I remember when I started going to high school. I love basketball too, and he was like, "Dude, I don't think you're good enough to make it there." And then I ended up
how dare you?
ended up making one of the freshman teams. It was essentially the B team, but I was like, I still made it. I still made it through cuts. It's not like football where they let everybody play because they don't want the first teamers to beat the hell out of each other in practice. They got the scout team for that. Like basketball, you had to like make it. So I was like, hey, but anyway, yeah. So getting into the releases, by the time you started to release singles, and was it, and maybe this is just Spotify, so if you released them earlier please correct me, but the first one that I saw was A Hole, which came out in February of 22. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the very first one. And that was the initial plunge, because at that point I had rough mixes ready to go, something like 30, 40 tracks, just kind of in the vault. And that one is actually amongst them. That was one of the first things I ever wrote. That initial riff that we come into was one of the first things I ever actually put down as a scratch track. And finally had the confidence and in both my execution and the ability to mix to go, okay, all right, you know what? If 5 people hear it, cool, done.
Yeah, because you ended up putting out 3 in 2022, right? A Hole, Predator, and then Arrows. was Predator about your cat?
Yeah, it's about my cat Smaug. A lot of metal takes itself so seriously, so I try every now and again. I try to do a joke song, but do it as earnestly as possible. So yeah, it is absolutely just how Smaug thinks he is the god of the house.
Cats are dope, man. Yeah, my cat Charlie, I had from 13 to 27, and he was when he went down, it was tough because I thought he was going to live to be like 25. He had so much energy, and unfortunately, him and my stepdad's cat ended up getting tumors like within a year of each other, and it kind of took them both out. And Bronson lived to be like 17, something like that, and Charlie was almost 14. So they still had pretty good runs, but yeah, Charlie had a personality, man. Like when I would write stories back when I was doing music features, he would lay on this same dining room table I have now. He would lay on my computer or lay behind my computer as I was writing, or he'd chill out on a chair. Like cats get a bad rap. I love dogs too. I truly do love them equally. I had a dog growing up for a little bit too, Ginger, but I feel like cats get a bad rap, man. People are always like, "Oh, they don't care. They're not like." It's not true, man. They're all like just like people are just like dogs, like any animal. They all have unique personalities, and he was like, he had a lot of like personality and was like smart and kind of nuts. You know what I mean? But he would wait for me when I'd come home from work by the door. He would hang with me when I was writing stories. So this idea that cats like don't care at all is not true. But the idea that they think they run stuff is absolutely true. They don't see themselves as subservient to humans at all. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially because I got a small little idiot, basically full of character, but one of the dumbest cats I've ever met in my entire life. And at the same time, as I'm walking from living room to kitchen, he will attack my legs, like from the depths of the some dark corner. Will just go "Wah!" and just run off, and then look back like, yeah, I could do that at any moment.
Does he still have his front claws too?
Yeah. He's fully clawed, and he's a little rescue from the middle of the desert.
Well, good, man. I'm glad you gave him a good home. And then the last single that you came out with in 2022 in June, so just about a year ago, was Arrows, and I read that one was about kind of like drug abuse and some survival's guilt as far as like, you made it through that, but there are other people around you from growing up who didn't. Kind of pretty powerful song, man.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of an exorcism of things that have been going on for a hot minute there, as far as like recollecting, and kind of resolving that in my head. Being a young desert rat with nothing else to do, there's not a whole lot else but do dangerous substances and make terrible decisions, and so many people fell out, and a lot of it was me wondering why I came out as well as I did and by what right. And it doesn't even, and Arrows was important because I didn't want to answer that question. I wanted to stew in that for a little bit, like recognize that sentiment and experience it as I'm tracking. And there's no answer there, but it was definitely kind of a salute to those who didn't even do as bad a thing as me, but somehow came to a more bitter end because of it.
Have you been able to, for the most part, make your peace with it now, looking back, Ben? Like in terms of where you are today versus kind of the survivor's guilt stuff?
Sure. I mean, to a certain extent, I've always kind of held to the universe is random and doesn't care about me, which is kind of comforting in its own way. So putting that upon myself isn't helpful or healthy to a certain extent. And yeah, you can't hold yourself accountable for the randomity of it all. I very easily could not have. And that would have been probably just as okay as it is now in the grand scheme of things, rather than personally. But yeah, less of a resolution and more of just a acceptance
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard, man. Like I ruminate a lot and it's really hard to turn off my brain. Um, and it's hard to forgive myself for like past dumb decisions and mistakes that I've made and stuff. Um, I don't know that I agree with the quote that time heals all wounds, because if you don't work internally to change, then time just passes. It doesn't really, you can be stuck, you know? So I've had to really kind of address that, and therapy's definitely been a big help with kind of moving on from things. Um, and some of it maybe too is me being a perfectionist where I like to figure things out. So if somebody hurts me and I don't understand it, I'll perseverate on it. Or like if I do something dumb, I'll be like, oh, why did I do that? But I do think time does help. The further you're removed from something, you can kind of look back retrospectively and almost like, well, that was a different person. And I think there's even that thing out there. I'm sure somebody who's more medically inclined than me will correct me, but I think they say something too, like your cells, even every 6, 7 years, are different. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at stuff now, and how I try to process grief or, past mistakes or pain, is just kind of go, well, if you could have done better at the time, you would have. If the people who hurt you could have done better at the time, they would have. That's who they were then. Maybe they're still the same now. It doesn't matter if they're not part of your life anymore. But for the mistakes that you make, I at least for me, that's kind of how I've made peace with it. Is like, well, I'm not the same guy that I was when I was 30. I'm not the same guy that I was when I was 25. Now that I'm 35, I'm not who I was when I was 15. Um, you know, that dude is still me biologically, DNA wise, but I'm not the same person. And I think that's kind of helped me with my anxiety, is to look at things like, try to look at thoughts as passing clouds, and that's not mine, by the way, for anybody listening. Like I'm reading a book my sister gave me from Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now, which has been around for a long time.
Okay.
And kind of talks about that in there, like try to separate yourself from your thoughts, and it's helpful.
Absolutely. And also just taking yourself outside of the experience and putting yourself into the perspective of someone else also experiencing that can kind of help frame your reference as well. Or say the ability to come back on a situation with the understanding that you have now, and the understanding that you would react or counteract in a different way, can immediately show self progress, which sometimes is really easy to get lost in the void, until you're. Sometimes I straight up bullet point things that happened and look at them from the perception that I've gathered now, and be able to think back on how I dealt with them there, compare and contrast. And sometimes it's night and day. Sometimes it's, oh, maybe I should keep working on that a little bit. Turns out there's some anger issues here still, or residual, but it's that old adage of hindsight is 2020 is not only just there because it's hokey and true, but also potentially useful.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. And for me too, like, you get to a certain point, man, when it comes to whether it's stuff about yourself you don't like, or stuff that other people have done or said to you that you don't like, where you're like, you know, I can't change what other people have done to me, but I can only, there's only so much ruminating that you can do, or so much self reflection, or looking at the past, or worrying about the future. Like it eventually does, like that emotional weight, like at least for me, it affects me physically. It affects me mentally. And you get to a point where you're so exhausted, you're like, I just can't do this anymore. And what you said a few minutes ago about acceptance, I think that's so important, not to sound self-righteous for people listening, but it's true. Certain things, like some stuff just is, and some people just are, and that is what it is. And you're not them, so you'll never be able to understand it. So you got to accept it. But even with yourself, it's like, I'm learning not to like look at myself as like this broken or dude, or this wimpy guy because I have anxiety. It's like everybody goes through stuff. I happen to be a little bit more open about it. than some people. And I think I deal with it in ways that are healthier than some choices I could make in terms of, drinking or drugs, which thankfully I've had my bouts with alcohol, but never to the point where I needed it to function. But I've had my bouts in the past where I've used it to cope and quickly realized that, oh, alcohol is a depressant. This is not a good coping mechanism. Um, but yeah, suffice to say that I think acceptance is important, and that when you can try to really separate yourself from your thoughts, good and bad, understand that, hey, life is always going to be a balance. There's going to be good times, but there's also going to be lulls. And if you can just try to remain calm through it all, it takes a lot of practice. And like you said, we're all ever evolving. So there's going to be stuff that you're always going to need to work on, but you got to kind of be forgiving of yourself and not beat yourself up, because then it's almost like a compounding effect. You're like, oh, I have anxiety now, I'm mad that I'm having anxiety, or I'm mad that I'm having a panic attack. Everything is fine, everybody's happy. Why am I the one at the barbecue who like wants to go run right now and get the hell out of here? Like, you got to give yourself some grace too through it all.
Absolutely. And also with the adding to time heals all things, but I also find a correspondence with age heals all things. Like, I don't know about you, but when I hit 30, there came this moment of a sudden release of everything. Like pre 30, I remember describing myself as feeling like a loose bag of flesh full of blood and bones, just kind of rattling around there, all gross and nebulous. And there came a certain point where, again, going back to acceptance, like, I may be that. Meh, what are you going to do? Carry on. It's going to be fine. And that, and coupled with, going into like phone jobs on a daily basis, forcing myself to talk to people and forcing myself to maintain some kind of gift of gab, as it were. Being able to come out of that and go, everything's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and the older you get too, I think the less you care what people think the way that you did when you're younger. Because I've realized, like, the older I get, like, even people who are quote unquote successful, and I'm using air quotes for people who are listening, but like, in America, we kind of define that as wealth, and the accumulation of it, just feeding yourself more of everything. And like, I know people who have that stuff, and I've come across people who have that stuff, and who would be considered wealthy or rich, and they have the same problems as everybody else, man. Like, the older you get, the more you realize nobody has it all figured out. And that's part of being human. And I think so much of societal pressure that we feel, a lot of it can come from our own expectations from ourselves, or from our own immediate households and our parents and things like that, or how you were raised, or the environment you came from. But a lot of it too is just what you're kind of told and sold growing up of what success means. And so then I think when people get to that age where they're like, oh, I don't own a home, and I don't have a 2-car garage and a picket fence and a golden retriever named Bert and a wife and 2 little rugrats running around, somehow I failed. But then you meet people who have the golden retriever and the picket fence and the 2-car garage and the mortgage, and their marriage sucks. You know what I mean? And so you're like, ooh, like, I'm glad I'm not that. You know what I mean? Because as a kid who's lived through 2 divorces, man, like, and I'm not saying it to like feel sorry for myself, like, I've seen beyond my own heartbreak that I've experienced in my relationships. Like, I know what that failure looks like too, and what that pain looks like. So suffice to say, I think if you just try to go through life and pursue the things that make you happy and be good to people, like, I wish more people knew that that's good enough. Like, we all got to eat. We have this hierarchical structure of money, and we all need money to survive. But if you make that the most important thing, I think it'll never be enough. You're just kind of chasing the dragon. It's like people who have more seem to always want more, So it's like, just do what you love, pay your bills, be good to people, and let the rest be the rest. It's easier said than done. I mean, I still have my anxious struggles every day, but I mean, I think the older I get, the more I realize it's like, don't compare yourself to other people. Your journey is exactly that. It's yours. And the people who you think are killing it, maybe really aren't, because you never know what really goes on behind closed doors in somebody's home.
Absolutely. And trying to define what that sense of satisfaction looks like in the end is A, almost impossible, but B, should be modeled for yourself. Like, my ideal end result is to be a curmudgeon hermit in the middle of nowhere with like cats and a shotgun on my lap, drinking an old fashioned, with hopefully my partner, and just quiet. And that's sufficient for me. And I also know that there are a lot of people out there who that sounds utterly abysmal. So, there's no one way to go about that kind of thing. But as long as there is a proper amount of introspection and a realization of what it is that you actually do want to attain, you're already halfway there at that point.
Yeah, and for you, and thanks again, Ben, so much for doing this, man. For your journey, you mentioned like a lot of this has been out of like necessity as far as recording on your own, and dealing with tremors and going, okay, I know when I'm feeling good and I can record versus paying to record at a studio and then maybe dealing with issues while I'm trying to play or whatever. But in addition to that, you mentioned like it was supposed to be instrumental, but then you sing. And for people who haven't checked out your work, it's very doom metal, progressive, but also there's some like deathcore and metalcore type vocals where you're really screaming, man. Like, when did you discover you could do that? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to do that and not just like completely ruin your vocal cords.
Yeah, so it was about a 7-month process from the moment that I decided that I needed to do vocals to then going, okay, how I do that? I immediately went to the YouTubes and found Cardivox Academy, Chris Lipe. I'm gonna butcher his name, but Andy Zizek, I want to say. And just pulling as much tutorial as I possibly can. And then at the time, I was working with commute and also time in the actual office. I was working about a 12-hour day. And so figuring out where to put the time to practice translated as in the car, in the parking lot of the Metrolink, in the parking lot at my job, in the elevator of my job, which always had some interesting reactions when the elevator door would open and I'm going like, and there are 3 people with their head just kind of tilted, like, oh, don't worry about it, I'm fine, come in. And just constantly checking technique, constantly going through variations of warm-up that made the most sense for what I was doing, and consistency. And I always hesitate to say this because I never want to make light of this because it affected a lot of people. It was a terrible tragedy. Like, lives were forever changed, but the pandemic was kind of the best thing that happened to me, as terrible as that sounds, because I went from a 12-hour workday to now I'm working remotely to this day. And all of a sudden I have nothing but room and time to practice as much as I desire. And that was right about at the last month of it all. And that was when finally everything clicked and switched over. I found my fry. I started developing my false chord. I started using mouth shape to really change up the timbre and tonality. Start getting into pitch screaming, and everything just suddenly went, oh, there you are. And yeah, that from there it was off to the races. It's to the point now where I almost like vocals more than I like doing guitar at this point. So long as they're screaming. I'm still super uncomfortable with clean vocals. I do it because it's uncomfortable, and it's kind of like a fuck you, Ben, do it. but yeah, it was just given the time and opportunity and stubbornness, kind of pulled it off.
Before you started doing vocals, had you ever done any type of like journaling or poetry? Um, or was that all kind of a fresh kind of thing to start doing lyrics for you?
Yeah, so before I ever thought about doing anything musically, I thought that I was going to be the next great American author. You know, I was going to be the novelist. I was going to be the poet laureate. So yeah, no, there are many notebooks filled with many differing qualities of various prose and poetry. So no, I've been doing that for a real long time.
Okay, because you went to school for journalism too, right? Like me, right?
Yeah, well, okay. I spent like 2 semesters, 3 semesters at a community college running a community college newspaper, but it was the only thing that interested me. So I didn't like go searching for a degree. I did it basically for love of the game. But yeah, the journalism bug is still there to a certain extent.
Well, I gotta imagine it was probably cathartic then as you started finding your voice and writing these lyrics and we'll get into Lone Desert Bones and Snakeskin Face here in a second. But I mean, touching on some heavy stuff in addition to the music being heavy, like did you find that that was difficult, or when you got it all put together and got it finished, did you feel like it was like a release?
So particularly with the first singles and the second and Lone Desert, it was utterly effortless. It was everything came together exactly as it meant to be. I spent no more than a handful of hours writing and revising. It felt real fluid. It was num. It was one of those moments where everything I could do no wrong in that moment. Not to toot my own horn, but toot. Um, it was I felt, and especially because previously when I was writing without music, I was always a little too prolix. I was always trying to be a little too formulaic. I was looking at structure because I wanted it to be visual as well as, and it was always just too much. It was always just way too much, and forcing myself within a musical structure, I think really found the middle ground for me. Like, I don't have to be Cummings every day. I don't have to, like, I'm not trying to be Cedric Bixler Zavala, you know? It's okay to just kind of shoot for meaning rather than, look at all the words I know. So, yeah, absolutely. It was a joy.
Yeah, it's something as far as journaling, like I've always thought about doing, and I've never been consistent with it, but there's something about when you get stuff out of your head and you put it on paper, or in your case, I'm sure as a creator writing songs, like you've removed it from just bouncing around between the ears like a pinball, you know what I mean? And I got to imagine that that feels good. And the times when I have journaled a little bit, it does feel good to be like, okay, it's out. You know what I mean? So that's it's good to hear that you had a good experience doing that material. Because like Lone Desert Bones, there was a sun, Do As Thou Wilt, Burned, which I read is about your father. If you want to get into that a little bit, Mirror, um, Mirror, I really, I mean, the whole release was good, but and then Stillborn at the end, but Mirror I enjoyed because there's cool drums towards the end of that, and then also there's like a cool. I don't know if interlude is the right way to describe it, but there's kind of a cool guitar part that reminded me a little bit of like Gojira-esque. Like I don't
Oh,
know
yeah,
about
with the tremolo picking a little bit.
yeah. So I was like, I don't know if he likes those guys too, but it kind of gave me some Gojira type vibes, and I love those dudes. But yeah, I really liked Lone Desert Bones, man.
Hell yeah, appreciate it, man. And yeah, I didn't. make that connection until you said it. But yeah, now that I think about it, that's absolutely Gojira-esque. And even with the drop, I don't worry too much about like whether something I'm doing is sounding too much like anyone else, simply because first off, there are only so many notes and I'm just doing zeros and ones and bunch of ignorant chugging and screaming. Like, it's okay. But also, yeah, that was also done on purpose as well, because it made me uncomfortable because of the hand of it all. I've never been a super shreddy guy, so that was, again, putting myself on purpose in an uncomfortable place. And Burned, which you mentioned, is the absolute height of that sentiment. So yeah, my dad passed, and that night after I had called like close family and we had, notified everyone who needed to be notified, tried to keep it as insular as possible, which didn't work out, but that's another story. I immediately came in here into the studio and started writing that night. And I was doing like really grandiose compositions with so many layers of guitar and really trying to make it this super epic thing. And it came out spurious in the end. It felt inherently wrong. And not only that, it felt, it's not the word I'm looking for, but heretical is what comes to mind. And like I was doing a disservice. And I was also, so the super cliff notes, my dad has suffered Parkinson's for a real long time, and with that came Lewy body dementia as well. So thank you kindly. But by the time he finally passed, honestly, I think we had all, like, within ourselves already said our goodbyes a long time ago. Like, he was there, but he also really wasn't there by the end. And so I wasn't sure what I was feeling, because there was nothing emotionally really going on, which is why I went in the studio in the first place, because this is where I come to sit down and go, okay, how the hell do I feel? And every time it just kept going really wrong. And maybe I want to say a couple of months later, which actually is, I've heard many people say that that's right around the corresponding time frame of when you're expecting someone to die and they finally die and you start actually processing emotions. So it was a little bit kismet, but I stripped down all the guitar layers, all the drums, all of the big epic stuff. I took a looper pedal, recorded one riff twice for the dual tracking, put the most bare bones drums, and suddenly said, here it is. Okay, we're good now. And then, because I was already super uncomfortable, and because I'm super uncomfortable with clean vocals, screw it, I'm going to make this almost entirely clean vocaled. So, I mean, if I'm already feeling antsy in my seat, might as well just dedicate the whole way. Yeah, so that was the long and sordid history of that particular one. I still have a hard time listening to that one, simply because I go, oh, why my voice do that? But, what are you going to do?
No, I like that one, man, and I think its place on the EP is good too, because it's in the middle. You know what I mean? So kind of have like the intro song with the sun, and then the fade out song was Stillborn. And there's a heavy moment in that one too, where you're like screaming, "Is it keeping myself in a lightless space?"
Yeah. Wait, I remember my own lyrics, honestly. Keeping myself,
or is it a lightless place or space? I was
trying to keeping myself in a lightless space. Yeah. That one is for all of the grandiosity of how I tell these. That one's just a panic attack in my shower. That's all that is.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was trying to, because it was a heavy part, and I was like, damn, like those are some heavy lyrics, but no, and my okay wasn't like, oh, like, no, I didn't mean it like that, but I meant like like I relate to that too. With the panic attack stuff. It's tough, man. Like in a weird way, like when you said the pandemic was great for you, in a weird way, it was kind of good for me too from the podcast perspective because it was
Mhm.
really kind of kicking the butt that I needed to do something that I had, I felt like for a while I had kind of lost sight of you know, a part of myself that it's like, again, not to sound self-righteous because I'm not that guy, but I feel like, and I probably should need to stop prefacing so much, but I feel like I'm supposed to be doing this stuff in a lot of ways. Like writing was something that came naturally even as a kid when I would do creative writing. That was always like outside of art class and like gym. Um, Creative writing was always really fun for me as a kid, and drawing when I was really young was like my first love. And so it kind of morphed when I got older and in high school, and you're starting to kind of figure out what do I want to do. Um, that kind of became like a natural path was like the writing and stuff. And but yeah, like I guess relating it to like the panic attack thing, like I think for me, some of my anxiety had gotten worse. Like on one end, the pandemic was good because it was the kick in the butt that I needed to do podcasting again and kind of get back in touch with that part of myself that I had kind of shut down and given up on, and go, oh, I'll just kind of take a more quote unquote practical route, and the whole climb to corporate ladder thing. And even though I work with good people in my job, and I'm very grateful for you know the work experience that I have there and the people that I work with every day in my day job, it's like if I'm not being creative, it's I don't feel fulfilled. I just don't. And so the pandemic was good for me because it opened up doing the podcast again, just working from home. And I wish we could still work from home more than we do. That's another conversation. But the bad part about it was it also coincided with a really bad breakup, and it coincided with people around me dying in 2021. 2021 was a brutal, brutal year. And I think the isolation kind of like, doing the podcast, this is like my safe place. This is like my cave. You know what I mean? So it was like, it was good because I'm connecting with people like this and doing things like this with you. But then it was bad from the standpoint of like, I'm kind of already reclusive when I go through stuff because I don't want to burden other people. And I just kind of deal with it on my own, which isn't really the best thing I've discovered. So it's weird. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. So yeah, when you said panic attack, I feel like I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had it resurface too much. And when they come on now, I'm kind of able to pull myself out of it. I kind of just sit in it and go, this too shall pass. Everything's fine. I'm not in any real danger here. Um, but yeah, it kind of some old demons I think kind of resurfaced, and I'm just now I think after the craziness of like the last 2 years with heartbreak and death, kind of getting back to myself a little bit. Um, when you get to this age too in your 30s, and I'm sure you can relate too, man, it's you have friends come and go more than when you're younger. When you're younger, you see people in school every day, or even like when you're getting out of high school and you're still in like your hometown, which kind of sounds like we had similar experiences like with that. It's like you wanted to get out of it, and then kind of like then when you get away from it, you're like, oh, like these new experiences have kind of taught me some of the things that I miss. And like so there's been a lot of like grief and loss, and I think that's kind of why I related to some of those things that came up in your music too. So that's a long way of saying when you said panic attack, I feel bad now. I just made all of that about me, but no,
No,
not feeling that experience at all because I relate to the panic attack stuff.
and I'm always glad to hear it, and especially because it does, especially when you're describing things suddenly coming up due to a sudden change in environment, or going through. I also went through a very violent shift in relationship status, which a son refers to, due to the pandemic, because you find yourself, you now have no choice but to really, it kind of filtered out by necessity things that may not have been the healthiest dynamics in your life simply because you have no choice now. And, you know, the corresponding ache that can create is, you know, not to be denied.
Yeah, man. And ultimately it's all, and thanks for going to these places, Ben, too. I appreciate it, man. But yeah, it's all necessary to growth. And I think that's kind of what I've learned too, is you got to be patient with yourself and like and be kind to yourself. Like somebody told me one time a few years ago, and it kind of just like hit me over the head. It was like, man, you would never treat anybody, Mike, the way that you treat yourself. And I'm like, wow,
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
yeah, you should not take pride in, you know, beating the crap out of yourself. That's not good. And if you really want to fully be able to love, you got to love yourself, you know? So yeah, man. Well, before we wrap it up, and thanks again so much, dude, for doing this. And I hope I haven't
Absolutely.
talked too much about myself, but just relating to the anxiety and stuff and some of the themes in the music and the loss and everything. Like again, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your father. But I'm glad that you were able to make a really cool song about it and get it off your chest. But the next EP is going to be called Snakeskin Face. And I don't know how much you want to totally get into it because, like I said, this will be end of August, early September. So I don't want to spoil anything that you haven't revealed yet. But you were kind enough to send me the EP, and I really enjoyed it. And if people are a fan of the doomy and proggy nature of your music and what you've put out so far with Lone Desert Bones and the other singles, I think they're really gonna enjoy this one. But can you talk to me a little bit about sort of the theme of Snakeskin Face?
Absolutely. And thanks again. This has been a blast. Yeah. So from a compositional standpoint, Snakeskin Face is supposed to have individual song structures that can stand up on their own in the shuffle and playlist kind of culture that we find ourselves in. But also, if listened from front to back, the intent was to formulate it as almost one entire whole composition. Differing themes, but pretty much a ley line between all of them. From a conceptual standpoint, it is absolutely about referring back to what we were discussing with the resolution of previous trauma and utilizing the steps that have been garnered over time to kind of put them to rest. Like understanding that if something severely traumatic happened, then there was probably not too great stuff was probably happening in the first place. So it may have informed you. So maybe don't beat yourself up too much going into it. Removing yourself from your own perspective and putting yourself in the perspective of whatever or whomever caused that trauma. Understanding that trauma, even as you begin to resolve, there's still going to be moments where you're doing your best to like kind of go through it, but it's still going to peek out at you. It's still going to rear its head every now and again, and that's okay. And also just like a final ability to, like, even if you're not fully fledged out your resolution and the happiest man in the world, you can still set it aside and go on. It's basically the ley line for that from a conceptual level. And it never 100% positive, because I think that's easy to do and seldom true. But just an introspector to that.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed it, and I think other people are gonna dig it when it comes out, and I know it'll probably be close to when this releases because this will be like I said, I think probably late August, early September when this is hitting. So I appreciate it, man. But yeah, man, and then the other thing that I wanted to touch on was you just recently in July put out a cover too called Family Happiness. And that's a cover. Is it John Darnielle? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, John Darnielle with Mountain Goats. That one, that was the first song that I ever kind of learned how to play on the guitar. Although even then, I was thinking about it from a cover standpoint because I never really wanted to play anyone else's stuff like straight through. But that one has such good bones to it that I knew immediately I wanted to jump on it, and it's just that one's just a good damn time, really.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool how that one turned out, man. I really enjoyed Family Happiness, man. I thought that was cool, and it's always cool to hear covers too, to hear people's takes on the original version. You know what I mean? Like I'm always fascinated by that when I listen to how musicians interpret somebody else's work, and there's been a lot of cool ones lately that have come out, I feel like, man. So yeah, kudos to putting that one out.
Thanks,
Was
man.
that one by
Appreciate it.
design that you wanted to get out before the EP, just as kind of like a teaser, or is it unrelated completely to Snakeskin Face?
Oh yeah, completely unrelated. That was just one. I originally recorded a really bad cover of that back in I want to say 2017 or something, and it was real bad. Had no idea how to mix, and I kept listening back to it and going like, "This is awful," but there's something there. I must do it again, and so I did. But yeah, I appreciate the hell out of that. That one's just for the funsies.
It was good, man. It was good. Well, before we officially wrap it up, thanks again, Ben, for taking the time to do this, dude. It's been great talking with you, and I'm glad that you're making music, and I hope you keep making music. I know there's like, from just reading that article, that was a year ago, there was 30 or 40, no pun intended, bones to songs and stuff in the can, man. So I'm glad that you're putting it out. And again, as somebody who listens to this podcast, and thank you again for the love and support and the kind words, man, in the past year. But with the theme of it being perseverance and moving forward, from you mentioned like drug abuse in the past, the passing of your dad, things that it sounds like you went to on a personal level over these last couple of years with the pandemic. I mean, is there any advice that you'd want to give to anybody listening to this, just in terms of things that have worked for you to get to a healthier place?
I think one of the strongest ley lines that we've kind of covered through this is turn disadvantages to your benefit, if only out of spite. Simply because it does kind of give you a different approach than I think anyone else might take. And that's pretty broad. I'm speaking, of course, of actual guitar work, but that can be taken as a pretty broad concept. Anything that you're having difficulty with or feeling super uncomfortable about, either lean into it or find how to surreptitiously go around and just do dope shit. Just always do dope shit if you can, and if you can't, that's okay, because there'll be a moment when you can.
Yeah, I think it's cool, man, and I think that's sage advice, especially like you said, like it kind of came from an FU moment for you, where you're like, oh, you're telling me I can't do it, I'm going to do it, and here you are making the music that you love to make, and forthcoming EP on the way, man. So I think it's awesome that in addition to that, you're have found your voice lyrically, and I think it just goes to show people, man, like just try it, like, and that's what I'm realizing as I get older too, pushing through fear. Like, it's better to try something, and even if it doesn't go the way exactly that you want, um, ask the question, well, what if it goes better than what I thought? And also you'll be able to look back on that journey and be happier that you tried, and also be happy with your work, and you're genuinely putting out good music, man. I love heavy stuff. I love doomy stuff. I love proggy stuff, and I really think people are gonna like Snakeskin Face, man. So thank you so much. For people who aren't aware, I'll obviously share the links in the pod description, man. But let them know where they can find your stuff, dude.
Yeah, well, before I do the obligatory, "Hey, you can find me," but also I do want to take the moment. Thank you very much. I've been going down this rabbit hole with your podcast for a hot minute. I love the work that you're doing as well. And again, it's always important to tell people when they do so. You know what? A little addendum to advice for other people: tell the people around you when they're doing good shit. But yeah, otherwise you can find me at Torr Band, which is amusing because it's just me on Instagram, and at some point I'll do other social media. I don't know how to do that stuff. I just do weird shit. But you can find me on the old Instagrams and on the Spotifys and anywhere you get music.
Well, Ben, thank you so much, dude. It's been great talking with you, and don't sell yourself short, man, because I know we talked even before we officially hit record about us both kind of doing that, and I hope both of our bodies of work to this standpoint show that we have something to offer and that is connecting with people. And again, thank you again so much, dude, for the kind words. It really does mean a lot, and I'm glad we got a chance to do this, dude.
Hell yeah, man. You have yourself a good one in the meantime, and I'll be looking forward to what you turn out next, brother.
Alrighty, dighty, there you have it. That was my conversation with Ben Fassett of Torr. Make sure you go follow him on Instagram at Torr Band, and that is spelled TORRBAND. That is all together. Once again, at Torr Band on Instagram. You can find his music where you get your music. All of the links will be in the podcast description for this episode. So just scroll down to the bottom of that podcast description, hit those links, and go follow and support my new friend Ben from Torr. You will not be disappointed if you love heavy music. If you're a fan of the aforementioned Stone Side, who I mentioned at the jump, if you're a fan of like Sleep Token, if you're a fan of doom metal, progressive metal, heartfelt lyrics, heavy vocals, it's all in there, man. Like I said at the jump, I'm a big fan of what he's doing, and I'm really excited for him. So once again, his latest EP, Snakeskin Face, out now where you get your music. It's all in the links for this episode. And I just want to say to Ben, once again, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate it when I meet new old friends, man. That's something that I stole from Michael Rosenbaum, and I'm going to keep using it. But I do. I feel like we're new old friends, dude. And I'm not just saying that because you were kind enough to reach out and give me kind words about the show over the past year. Even though I very much appreciated that, man, and I took all that to heart. It's always nice when people reach out and tell you that they appreciate what you're doing and what you're putting out into the world. And it makes me happy to know that just by pursuing something that I love, I'm able to have that impact, no matter how small or how big, on at least one person. So thank you for the kind words. But more importantly, man, I think you're a good dude. I genuinely enjoy the music that you're putting out there. And I'm really, really happy we were able to do this and get you on a podcast as somebody who's a fan of the podcast, as somebody who's a fan of podcasts in general and appreciates journalism and good journalism, dude. I try to do my best, and I'm just really appreciative that you reached out and that we've been able to connect and do some cool stuff together. And also, Ben edited the raw audio. We had some, you heard it a little bit at the end. It really wasn't prevalent throughout the show, and we couldn't figure it out. I didn't know if it was my mixing board, if it was something on his end. My mixing board is very, very, I mean, it's not very old, but it's like 8 years old now. I've had it since 2015. And I was getting a little bit of a buzz, and you could kind of hear it towards the end. But Ben did a great job of taking the raw audio from our conversation and editing it, and I really appreciate him doing that. That's always a funny word, by the way, editing. Say it 3 times fast. But he took the time to do that, man, because I'm not great with the audio engineering stuff of this. I'm still a caveman. I have a new computer, and I actually record the intro and the close of the show and put it together on the previous version of Audacity on my old computer. I haven't taken the time to learn the new version yet. But yeah, thank you to Ben for doing that. And yeah, just a good dude. I'm happy for him. I'm happy that he's making music that means something to him. I'm happy that he's proved the naysayers wrong about, playing guitar, singing. He's put the time in to learn it, making his own music. I mean, that's a lot of work, you guys. It is. I mean, I think we forget as people who aren't musicians, right? If you're not a musician listening to this like me, how much time goes into making good music and recording things. And by the time it comes out, the artist who has put it out has listened to it umpteen times already, tons of times, and I've heard bands talk about that. By the time they go on tour to play the new material and the new album, they've already been, they've worked it to death already for, a year or longer or whatever. So the fact that Ben has put in the time, despite the naysayers, despite the issues with his hand and stuff, and still makes dope riffs and awesome music for people to listen to, I think is really cool. So I hope that's an example for you guys out there that, a lot of the limitations that we have, and this is advice for myself too, because I've had some weak moments in the past couple weeks, if you get stuck in a negative thought loop or negative thought patterns about yourself, forgive yourself for having a moment and then do your best to move past it. One of my biggest issues is that I hold on to things, especially when it's things about myself that I don't like. And those limiting beliefs keep us from achieving our dreams and keep us from making more positive connections in our own mind in terms of just our own synapses and how our brain works, but also with other people. So be kind to yourself, love yourself, be good to yourself so that you can be there for other people and so that you can find whatever it is that you have to offer. And we all have something, and use it for good in the world, man. So I hope that Ben's story inspires you guys that despite whatever naysayers there are, despite whatever, mental or physical health issues you may or may not have, or whatever heartbreak or pain or, things that you've been through, addiction issues, things that you did that you're not proud of, every day is an opportunity to wake up and turn over a new leaf. We all get the same 24 hours regardless of our income or where we live in the world, man. And some of us definitely are more fortunate than others when it comes to the parents that we were born with, or the families we were born into, the environments that we were born into. But we all get the same 24 hours, man. And there's always going to be those people in your life that are like crabs in a bucket and they're trying to pull you down. But there's also going to be those people in your life, like I talked about at the beginning. I had really good grandparents, or there might be an authority figure, a teacher, a coach, a friend. There's always going to be those people who are your biggest cheerleaders. And I think that those people are God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, coming through to kind of remind you when you're getting in your own way that, yes, you have something to offer. You are worthy. You are loved. You're worth it. Go for it. And I can honestly say that in my life, it has been those times where I have done the things that have scared me. And I'm not talking about risky, dumb stuff, but, going for things that, whether it was like asking out somebody, or it was, reaching out for somebody to come on the podcast, or, taking a chance to meet some new people. It was always the things that were a little scary to me. Moving to a new city when I came to Nashville, I didn't really know anybody, man. All my close family and friends were all back home in Ohio and Southeast Michigan. So I digress. But those things that were difficult or scary initially ended up being the best things that have ever happened to me, even when they didn't work out the way that I planned, because they helped me grow and become a better man and a better human being. So this is as much for me as it is for you. Love yourself. Be kind to yourself. Forgive yourself if you have a difficult moment. Learn from your mistakes and move forward. Learn to look at your thoughts as passing clouds. And just be cool to people, man. Pursue what you love. Work hard. And you can go to bed at night knowing that you did a good job in the world today. Because that's all you got to do. Be good to people. Be good to yourself. Pursue what you love. And I think you're going to be just fine out there. Even when the storms come, they will pass. So on that note, I'm going to shut my big yapper and officially wrap things up here, because I know I ranted a little bit in the beginning, but it's just been kind of an emotional time. And again, it's not even about me. It's more me worrying about people in my life and their well-being and that they're okay. And, like I just said, there's going to be storms that come and go. And right now there's just been a few storms with some people that I love. So I'm praying for them. I'm sending good vibes up to them, and I'm there for them, and they know that. But yeah, love each other. Be good to each other. Once again, love you, Ben. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Everybody go check out Torr, Snakeskin Face, out now. Go back and check out the other work, Lone Desert Bones, that came out in April. He did a cool cover. Family Happiness, that came out in July. Check that out. And once again, he's on Instagram at Torrband, TORRBAND. The links are in the podcast description. And once again, if you enjoyed what you heard, thank you so much for taking the time to get all the way to the end here and for listening to the show. If you are a first-time listener, if you would be so kind, even though I hate begging for this stuff, to either like, subscribe, leave a rating and a review on either Apple or Spotify, tell a friend to tell a friend. All those things go a long way. Sharing on social media in helping the podcast get out to more people and put more people on to Ben's story and his music and other awesome creators like him that I've had on the show. So thank you so much for listening. Once again, you can follow me on Instagram at March 4th Pod, on YouTube at March 4th Pod, my website and my link tree in the podcast description for this episode if you want to learn more about me or check out the archives, man. So That's going to be a wrap for this week's episode. Keep the faith and be kind to one another. Courtesy of my dude Ben. This is the first song off of his latest EP, Snakeskin Face. This one is called Workhorse. Peace.